Hello, this is Russell Moore, and you're listening to The Russell Moore Show, brought to you by Christianity Today. Every week, we explore here conversations and questions from a Christian perspective to help you sort out how to live as a follower of Jesus in confusing times. And this week, we have a conversation to seek to do just that. I am really excited to be joined today by my friend Benjamin Watson, who is a former NFL tight end and a writer, activist, and speaker. He serves as vice president for strategic relationships with the Human Coalition, and with his wife is the co-founder of the One More Foundation, M-O-R-E, not M-O-O-R-E, but One More Foundation. And they have 7 children of various ages. Well, I guess they would be of various ages unless they were, what would that be? Septuplets?
Two of them,
yes.
two of them are actually the same age. So, I mean, some of them
That's
are various
true.
and 2 of them are the same.
That's true. That's true. Benjamin is the author of the new book called The New Fight for Life, Roe, Race, and a Pro-Life Commitment to Justice. Welcome to the Russell Moore Show, Benjamin.
Hey, it is an honor always to speak with you. So I appreciate everything you do and stand for. You know this, but definitely one of your biggest fans. So I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you.
One of the things that you mentioned at the beginning is that when Roe versus Wade was overturned, when the announcement came down that Roe versus Wade was overturned, you kind of had mixed feelings. And those are my words, not your words. But can you tell us what you were thinking through when you heard that news?
Yeah, last year, I think it was the decision that so many of us have been looking forward to be quite honest. But also there was a feeling that, is this really happening? Like, is Roe v. Wade actually being overturned in the United States of America in 2022? Even though there had been the Supreme Court leak, which was unprecedented. And I still felt like, wow, I don't know if this is actually going to happen. And I can remember the morning when I first heard, my wife and I were actually about to go speak somewhere in Texas. And, I saw all the news coming over the news feeds, Twitter and such. And the feeling was one of definitely happiness, but also this feeling of, all right, what's next? Like, what does this actually mean? So much work had been done over the last 50 years by pro-lifers in various capacities, whether they be in faith or in, advocacy roles or in medicine. I mean, so many people have poured so much into this. But also on the other side, you had a group of people who felt like their rights were being stripped away from them. And they generally felt like this was an egregious attack on their own autonomy. And I knew that at that point, this was not over. This was simply going to be, a new fight for life, so to speak, and just a new time of not only pro-life advocacy, but what does it actually mean for the women who were planning to have abortions? Because as we know, there are reasons why, and those issues are not addressed totally by Roe v. Wade being overturned. Although we applaud that, I wondered, okay, what's next?
Yeah. There are some people, someone was just telling me yesterday, said, I'm really concerned because even though we've had 50 years to get ready for this, and there's been tremendous work done by people who have really devoted their lives to caring for women and children in crisis. But this person said, I feel like the church is not ready to actually deal with the real human needs that people face. Do you see it that way? Are we kind of way behind where we ought to be?
Well, I don't want to speak for every church, but I will say this, it's not even our opinion. I mean, a recent Pew Research poll came out that said something like less than 10% of churchgoers have even heard a sermon about the issue of abortion. And that number actually rises and falls depending on what denomination you're in. But the point of the matter is that most people who attend churches in America, most people who are believers in America, have not heard preaching or any sort of teaching from the Bible from on this topic of abortion. And I think part of that is because statistically, abortion is as prevalent inside the church as it is outside. And so there's a lot of pain and a lot of shame. And we know in scripture where it talks about no condemnation in Christ Jesus, and that, your pain can become, your purpose and your mission. I mean, God forgives and restores, but also I think there are a lot of folks who are believers who don't quite know how to engage. This issue has become so politically charged in our American context that immediately when you say abortion, even in a church context, it's either going to be Democrat or Republican or independent. And a lot of folks don't want to deal with that. And that's unfortunate because in the crossfire and the collateral damage are the preborn children and the women and the men who are facing these decisions when we as a body aren't really addressing it the way that we should because the culture has taken it and made it something that it's not.
There are so many things there that I want to dive into, but I'm going to take them one at a time. And the first one is you and I have talked about this before, where I've been really concerned for a long time that we're accustomed to arguing this issue with pro-choice people. And we assume, well, that means that the argument is about whether or not the unborn child is a person, whether or not there are nonviolent ways to address crisis pregnancies and so forth. But a lot of the people in abortion clinics or taking abortion drugs are pro-life in the sense that they don't deny that what they're doing is an act of violence. They just think they have no other choice. I mean, I don't know if you saw Chris Rock talking about abortion. It was really kind of chilling in his latest comedy special because he said nobody's paid for more abortions than I have, or something like that. But let's just be honest that what we're doing is killing. And it was really chilling, but I thought, you know what? That is exactly what's going on in a lot of minds of people who are thinking, I know that what's happening is wrong, but in this case, I just have to do it. You think
Yeah.
you see that showing up as well?
Well, unfortunately, sometimes life seems to make you decide between the lesser of two evils. But when it comes to abortion, I think you're right. It is killing. And the reasons why, however, people do that, many of them value life. Most of them value life. You'll be hard pressed. There are a few people who are just calloused and say, this is what it is, and they shout their abortions. But 76% of abortion determined women say that they would prefer to parent if their circumstances were different. 76%. And so while they are still seeking abortions, many of them would say, look, if financially I was stable, if my relationship with the father was stable, if I had adequate housing, if I had a livable wage, if I had perhaps more education or childcare so that I could go to work, if I had health care, there are all these reasons why people give. And I think part of the argument and part of the compassion that we as pro-lifers should have is to say, for that person, those are very, very real, tangible reasons. Now, we don't agree that you kill your child, but it's imperative not only for the church, but also for the entire pro-life movement to say, how do we as individuals and how do we as collectives address some of these issues? It's part and parcel with what we see throughout Scripture, where it talks about righteousness and justice and serving people, and the story of the Good Samaritan, and in James, where it talks about not taking advantage of workers, and all those sorts of things are all layered into this conversation, because right now, those 76% of women are still seeking abortions. I mean, the fact of the matter is, across this nation, 75% of the nation still has legal abortion. And 93% of abortions occur within the first 13, 14 weeks. And so this is still a really, really prevalent problem.
And over half happening pharmaceutically now.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Over half are happening. And part of that was, because of COVID, and it's just going up. I mean, there are predictions, I believe, that possibly over 60 to 70% in the coming years will be chemical abortions. And so the whole idea of going to a Planned Parenthood and that whole thing is kind of different now. Women are able to have abortions in the privacy of their own home. Going back to what Chris Rock said, it is still killing. And so we should operate in compassion, but also with conviction.
One of the reasons you said that about so many people who've never really heard any teaching on this issue. I wonder if one of the reasons that is because it's difficult for a lot of people to be able to simultaneously talk about the moral injustice and the human dignity injustice of abortion and the good news of forgiveness and no condemnation for those who are in Christ. You have to do both of those things, and of course, that's exactly what Romans 3 does. Is both justice and justification, truth and grace. But it's hard to do in the moment, isn't it? Because you have this sense that there might be some people who, when they hear me talking about the wrongness of abortion and they're already weighted down with guilt for an abortion and they think that Jesus won't receive them, that just pushes them further in that direction. Or if I talk about God's grace and forgiveness for abortion, that maybe that will cause the person who's thinking through having an abortion to think, I'll just get forgiveness later. I mean, it's really hard to hit exactly in the biblical gospel balance there, isn't it?
It is, and it's a false dichotomy that unfortunately we as fallen human beings are prone to. We're in an either or society, and so it's either justice or mercy, or it's grace or truth, and we forget that Jesus came as the full manifestation of all those sorts of things, and that the gospel really shows us everything. It shows us our wretchedness. It shows us God's mercy. It shows us the justice on the cross, that sin had to be paid for by a willing and flawless substitute, which was Jesus Christ. It shows us compassion, but also shows us the conviction. And we tend to, because of our tribal mentality, pick one or the other. I'll tell you another reason, Dr. Moore, that I think, and I found that it's difficult to talk about this in church, is because so many times we want to identify and point the finger at sin that doesn't impact us. And so it's much easier for us to talk about certain things as being wrong, whether it be abortion, homosexuality, drunkenness, whatever it may be. If it doesn't impact, if that's not our issue, many times we say these are the acceptable sins that are just, mistakes, and they're just vices, and they're just, you messed up and took a misstep. But these things over here are the things that are really going to condemn you. And we, many times, even if it's subconsciously, we think that way and we preach that way, even when it comes to race in America. And we say, that's just how you were raised. Those are just traditions. Like, no, that's the sin of favoritism, and that's the sin of hatred. That's what it is. And we all need the blood of Christ to cover whatever those sins are. We've done a good job of harboring, I think, certain things and not talking about others as if they are unforgivable.
Your book is called The New Fight for Life. And one of the things that I'm concerned about, and I wonder how you see it, um, there was a time for a long time that there were people who would say, well, let's just deal with persuasion. And if you can just talk people out of having abortions, there's no need to deal with the public justice aspect of it. And obviously, you and I disagreed with that. But now, maybe the what I'm seeing that I'm really scared of is the reverse, where we have a legal structure that maybe agrees with us on abortion, at least in some places, but we end up creating an even bigger pro-choice majority. Because if you look at, I remember being one time at the March for Life, and Donald Trump was speaking. And let's just set aside what anybody might think or not think about Donald Trump. Simple fact of the matter is, this is somebody with a very, very low approval rating among under 30s, who are the people that we're attempting to persuade. And if you tie those things together, where this simply becomes not just that it simply becomes a political issue, but it becomes a political issue anchored to all kinds of other stuff that people reject, so that they turn around and say, well, you don't really believe this. This is just convenient for you. We might end up in 20 years with a situation similar to what Jesus talked about, where he says one demon leaves and seven more come back. What can we do better when it comes to persuading people of the goodness of human dignity in life?
Yeah, I think that part of persuasion is authenticity, and it is
Mm,
this idea of integrity. I think, meaning wholeness. Integrity is the idea of not being duplicitous in the way that you speak and the way that you
mm,
act. And I think the challenge right now, to your point, for pro-lifers is to show an integrity or a wholeness when it comes to human dignity and addressing the sanctity or the sacredness of life. And that comes from womb all the way to
mm,
tomb. It comes from fertilization to the grave or conception to the grave. And that there are a whole bunch of there are a host of issues that have to do either directly or indirectly with the issue of abortion. And the world is watching. And so the world is watching
mm,
when we harbor racist ideology and say that that's okay, but then say we're pro-life. The world is watching if
mm,
we look at end of life care with the elderly, or when we speak about those who have some sort of mental challenge or disability, and how do we treat those people. The world is watching when we even talk about those who are from other countries, and how do we respect them while obeying our laws. How do we respect and honor their human dignity, because they are made in the image of God
mm,
as well. And so there are a bunch of issues, I believe, that are connected to this. And part of our challenge with the legal side of it, and the legal, let's be clear, the legal challenge is nowhere near from over. It is a
right.
fluid situation from state to state now, where states are deciding what their limits are going to be on abortion, from totally illegal to totally unfettered. But within that, how we present as believers, how we speak about and care about and fight for human flourishing holistically, I think sends an even larger message than anything that the Supreme Court or state Supreme Courts can do, because then we're telling people that I care about life. Even, as I talk about, in the book, there are so many other issues, even an issue like equal pay. Someone may say, what does that have to do
Mm,
with
mhm,
abortion? What does that have to do with abortion? Well, if black women earn almost 58 cents on the dollar to their white male counterparts for the same job and the same education, and these same black women are 3 to 4 times more likely to have abortion than their white counterparts, you tell me that this issue isn't connected to life. And I think in this
mm,
in this new, what I call a new fight for life, the pro-life movement needs to understand that these different justice issues will have some sort of impact on the abortion rates that we do care about, because they impact mothers and they impact fathers and they impact communities that are suffering from the stain of abortion. We can't ignore those things.
mm. I want to talk in just a minute about the church and what the church can be doing. But before that, we have a lot of members of Congress, state legislators, judges, and others who listen to this show. And I'm imagining one of them saying, okay, I have some power to change the policy landscape. And if I wanted to be whole life, pro life, womb to tomb, care for human dignity, what are some things I could do?
I know you got to get votes, and so your constituency has to be happy. And sometimes they're not happy with certain stances that you make if you lead. But quite honestly, you have to be willing to lead. In the book, I talk about several, but one of them has to do with education. And again, kind of the premise of my writing was saying, okay, abortion can be looked at in a broad sense, and pregnancy resource centers, funding pregnancy resource centers is one of those things. There are 2,700 pregnancy resource centers around the country that are offering tangible resources. They are connecting women with social services. They are providing educational opportunities. So funding those resource centers around the country, I think, is one thing. But also, when you think about the typical or average woman who is seeking an abortion, studies, whether they are Christian religious studies or whether they're a secular study, most of them would say that she is in her late 20s. She already has a child. She has at least a high school diploma, probably maybe partially a college diploma. She has a job, but it is either a part-time job or she is underemployed. There might be some sort of housing insecurity there as well. And as I mentioned before, statistically, she is probably a minority woman, probably a Black woman. And so to me, the issues for policymakers is how do we address that demographic? And we do that by a lot of different ways, whether it is creating tax benefits for children, whether it is providing for education, subsidies for that, whether it is even dealing with, Dr. Moore, we've talked about even the criminal legal system. Somebody would say, how does a criminal legal system impact abortion? Well, you know what? If you have the fathers of some of these children, who some of them are facing longer sentences for the same crimes, and so they are out of the house and unable to provide, that directly impacts, because that woman within the 48 hours, she would say, if a man was there to say, I would be there, she would not make that decision. And so I think that there are several options for policymakers, but Dr. King once said that so many people are uneasy with injustice, but they're unwilling to pay a significant price to change it. And now I think it's a time where we decide in our own spheres of influence, whether that's in the halls of Congress or whether that's like what you're doing, whether that's me as a parent with my kids, deciding what are we going to do to change it.
I have right over to my side here a painting of somebody that's a hero of mine. And when I saw her name in your book, I cheered. And that's Fannie Lou Hamer, my fellow Mississippian,
Yes.
Sunflower County,
There
Mississippi.
you go.
She was amazing. She was amazing. But I couldn't help but think, you know, Fannie Lou Hamer in my home state, uh, I think in some surveys has the highest percentage of people who will say I'm pro-life on the abortion issue, and also has the highest infant mortality rate in the
Yeah.
country at the same time. I mean, how do we convince people? I mean, it seems like that should be obvious that if
Yeah.
you care about imperiled children, that you ought to care about infant mortality, but apparently it's not obvious to a lot of people.
And again, um, without getting into all of it, I believe it comes down to politics again. And I think that that's the challenge, Dr. Moore, with believers is that, yes, we live in a politic. We live in a constitutional republic where the laws are how we operate. We have a two-party system. This is not ancient Israel. This, we live in a different time. But when you have a
Yeah.
situation where maternal mortality is high and infant mortality, and you have a situation specifically in Mississippi where there are maternal care deserts, where people can't get maternal care, where people can't even get to hospitals, much less get some sort of care. And even if they could get there, could they really afford it? When you have one of the poorest areas in the poorest states in a country that has so much and such ability, then you wonder, like you said, where is the commitment? And so I'd love to hear your perspective on it. But from my perspective, a lot of it is tied up in political affiliation. And I'm not one to condemn all Republicans or to condemn all Democrats because both parties and independents, everybody's got their issue. But how do pastors, how do community leaders, how do we talk about that specific issue and push people out of their comfort zones when it comes to funding and providing federal qualified, health centers, hospitals, maternal care, health care? All those things impact life, and they impact someone's decision to even have a child in the first place.
What about the church? I mean, we talked about, we should have had 50 years to get ready and have a system in place to care for people better than, at least in some churches, we do. But we are where we are. What can churches do if they're in a situation where they say, okay, we're in a place, maybe we're in a place with a lot of abortion vulnerable women, maybe we're in a place with a high maternal or or infant mortality rate. Maybe we're in a place, any number of issues, the income inequality question that you raise, or pay inequality question you raise. What can churches do to care for people in a situation like this?
Yeah. I love that story from, I think it was ancient Roman times, where they were talking about how the Romans would take infants out and let them die by exposure. And as the story goes, the early Christian church, opened their doors and they brought these children in and cared for them. And in that way, they turned the tide of such a despicable thing that was happening. The church has always been different from the world. I even quote you in the book, a quote that you made about a church that needs to be distinctive from the world. And if it's not distinctive, then it's a Christianity that is dying. And so, as a church, there are several churches who are doing this, whether it's adoption services that they help facilitate, whether it is adopting a pregnancy resource center locally, whether it is opening their doors for childcare in the building while it's not being used during the week, whatever it may be, whether it's teaching the children in their church about sexuality, about marriage, about identity, about fatherhood, all those things that seem to be that we let the culture talk about all the time, and we let the culture teach our kids about. It's being bold within the church doors and teaching about those sorts of things. I mean, outside of the funding, obviously, that many churches have, some of them don't. The people within the church are involved in every single sphere of society. I played 16 years in the NFL, and we all had a job to do, Dr. Moore. You didn't want me throwing the football, although I wish I could have been a quarterback, would have made a whole bunch more money. I wasn't the one out there throwing the football because that wasn't my job, although I was part of the team. And when you look at a church, you are looking at a group of people where there are attorneys, there are teachers, there are doctors, there are activists, there are people who are in Congress, there are people who own grocery stores, hospitals. There are so many people in that body. And then individually, the question is, what is your time, your talent, and your treasure that you can use to serve the pregnant women that are in your community? I think outside of that, it's humbly asking God how to lead you.
Sometimes you have a church where what God's raised up are a lot of people who are able to be involved in the foster care system. And another church, you've got a lot of people who are really concentrating on dealing with unwed mothers in distress and finding homes and jobs for them. And sometimes a church thinks, well, because we can't do everything, that means we can't do anything. And that's just not true, is it?
I mean, sometimes people think that, though. Sometimes people think that because I can't do everything, I can do nothing. I mean, sometimes we feel like, I mean, honestly, when you look at the problems of the world as an individual, I think many of us want to do something. And then once we start digging into it, whether it is crime, starvation, poverty, whether there's human trafficking, we look at these issues, abortion, and we say, I got enough to deal with on my own, with my own kids and my own life and my own job. I can't bear it. I can't make a dent in anything that is going on. And one thing my wife and I talk about all the time is just impacting one. Impacting one more child, one more mother, one more community, one more father. Move the needle for one more person. And I think as we humbly ask God how he would ask us and lead us to be involved, I think that's where the big things happen.
You talk in the book, I loved this, about jubilant justice. And I think that's great at a time when for a lot of people, they use social justice as a way of shutting down people who are trying to apply what the Bible says in terms of loving their neighbor. And you talk about jubilant justice. What do you mean by that?
Well, justice is one of those words that is used by everybody. Now, there's environmental justice, reproductive justice. You mentioned social justice. And, one thing my wife and I started doing a little while ago was like reading through scripture, once a year. And I had never really done it before. I, read different parts, obviously, and, knew the story, but taking the time to actually read through the Bible in a year and do it multiple times. And you see a couple things throughout scripture, one of which is obviously God's holiness. You see the story of sin, but you also see this thread of justice. Justice is this kind of restoring humanity back to its original intent. And while we know that won't happen this side of heaven, we understand that as his ambassadors here on earth, our job, part of what we're charged with doing, is being generous, is trying to restore humanity to its wholeness that we saw in the garden. Even though we know it won't be there, that's what we're charged to do. And so part of the Jubilant Justice conversation is the joy of not only giving, but the joy of leaning into what God would have us to do while we are spending our time on this earth, and understanding that it's going to take something from us. Even in the parable of the Good Samaritan, who was his neighbor? His neighbor wasn't the person that was most like him. His neighbor was a person that sacrificed something that he had, his time, his talent, his treasure, in order to help someone else who the world thought was going to be their enemy. I think that has a lot of implications for where we sit right now, especially when it comes to race, politics, and even obviously the issue of abortion in this country.
Isn't it odd how some people who will say on the issue of racial justice, well, this is a matter of personal sin. You ought not to hate people, but there's no systemic issue, and we ought not to talk about it in those terms. And yet often the same people, they recognize that there's both a personal and a systemic aspect of, say, abortion, because it's not just a question of whether or not somebody decides to have an abortion, although that's true. It also has to do with do you have an industry setting up in an area? Do you have advertisement? Do you have social pressure? Do you have all of those things? And isn't it odd how sometimes people can't make or won't make that connection in their minds?
I think the last part is right. The won't make, because again, we craft arguments to protect our viewpoint. Like we craft fences and arguments that will protect what we believe to be true, or perhaps protect us from feeling guilty or ashamed or addressing some sort of sin that we are harboring. It started a long time ago. It started in the garden when Adam said, "It was the woman you gave me." We always construct those types of arguments, but the abortion industry. Many people will identify the racism in the abortion industry, and one of the reasons for even writing the book, Dr. Moore, was I heard a lot of people say that Black women were 3 to 4 times more likely to have abortions. And I heard a lot of people say that the abortion industry is racist. And I heard a lot of people say that Margaret Sanger was a eugenist, which she was, and all those sorts of things. But I struggle to hear those same people say why Planned Parenthood was successful, or the abortion industry was successful in profiting off of race. And in order to say that they're racist, then they're going to go where they can profit. And so the funnel that feeds the abortion industry is the racism, or the structural racism in America. And so you have to deal with both. Like I have to faithfully deal with an industry that yes, goes where people are vulnerable, and disproportionately those people are Black. But I also have to say, why can they do that in the first place? Well, they can do that because of a history and a litany of policies that have been discriminatory, policies that have stripped the ability to build wealth, ongoing residential segregation, a host of other things that has happened in this country and has continued to happen in this country. And the two are benefiting from each other. And it is unhelpful. And I found it to be actually insulting when people can identify one but won't look at the other.
Yeah. I mean, especially when we're in a time when there are school districts, multiple school districts, districts in the country where children are not allowed to read books about Ruby Bridges, for instance, because it's labeled as critical race theory or something like that. And it seems as though we're at a really perilous time right now with both the rise of explicit white supremacist domestic terrorism, but also just in terms of, I think there's some people who just thought, well, you just give people time and you just give history time, and this will all work itself out. And that hasn't happened, has it?
Nothing works itself out without intentional movement
Hmm.
and intentional leadership. And there is always a battle, at least in this country, there always has been when it comes to race and what it is. I say in the book, I even hate using the term race. The only reason why I use it is because that's how we operate, unfortunately, in this country. And that's vernacular everybody understands. We know that we are but one blood. The Bible says we understand that between you and I on this call, we could be more genetically alike than another black man that I walk by because we are but one race. But unfortunately, in this country, there's always been a battle for personhood.
Hmm.
Much of the battle that we even see when it comes to the issue of abortion. And part of that battle for personhood comes in many phases. And one of them is hiding history or not speaking about things that make you feel uncomfortable. I've always said that one of the best ways for us to move on and understand race is to address and understand and learn what has happened and what is happening, and then see if we're willing to address it. Unfortunately, we haven't collectively been willing to, because going back to what Dr. King said, we're uneasy with injustice, so we hide our head in the sand, or when we learn about it, we make excuses and we use whataboutisms, or we decide that, you know what, now's not the time. I believe there's a fierce urgency of now with the issue that you're bringing up, but also with the pro-life movement. Like there has to be a fierce urgency of now and not this idea of apathy that many of us have settled into.
How do we get men to see where they fit in this? And how do we get the church to really equip men to be able to learn how to be parents and to take responsibility and so forth?
Oh man, where do I start, Doc? Because again, going back to the garden, what Satan did was he tried to remove the man from his headship and from the equation. That's what Adam did. Adam blamed his wife. He blamed woman. Satan created a disorder, and he is still creating disorder. And when there is disorder in a family or relationship or a nation, then there's going to be problems. And so we continue to fight this as men because of the fall. But how do we get over the lies? I think one of the lies that you hear quite often is that it's a women's issue. Men get out of it because it's a women's issue. Now that statement just doesn't hold scientific weight. So one way to address it is say, well, my children, I've got 7 of them, Dr. Moore, and they've got 46 chromosomes. They got 23 from me and 23 from their mom. And so I am part of the equation, whether you like it or not. So I do have a say so from a scientific genetic standpoint. But outside of that, it has to be men challenging other men. During my time in the NFL, one of the things that I truly do miss now that I don't get to do as often is being with other guys talking about the issue of fatherhood, manhood, being husbands, and challenging guys that no matter if you saw it demonstrated for you at your house or whether you didn't, you still have what it takes. Because deep down inside, so many men wonder if they have what it takes to be the men that they desire to be, because most of them want to be good dads. And so specifically when it comes to abortion, when people say, it's not a man's issue, sometimes that comes from hurt, honestly. And there are a lot of women who say that, and they deserve to be hurt. We've treated them terribly. We've disrespected them in so many ways. We have run over them. We have left them. We have treated them horribly. And so it makes sense for them to have that sort of sentiment. But also for some men say it sometimes as a get out of jail free card, as a way to defend their bad behavior. But I think the challenge is for men who care about life, who care about women, who care about children, and outside of that, who want to live how God has called men to live, we've got to be willing to be honest and challenge other men and challenge ourselves when it comes to using our voice, using our actions, using our hands and feet to really show what this means.
I was having this conversation on this show not long ago with Esau McCauley about dads, and one of the things I talked to him about, I don't know if it was on the air or off, but we talked about the fact I had just had, and this has happened several times, but a young man who said, I really shouldn't get in a relationship. I shouldn't get married. I shouldn't because I can't. I shouldn't have children because I have no good role models, and all my role models have been bad. And so I'm afraid I'm going to be a terrible dad. And in every one of those situations, I've said, you're not going to be a terrible dad. And the reason I know that is because you're worried about that. You're thinking about that. You're going to find good role models. Don't you think there's some people who think, well, my past, whatever it is not good. And so that means I'm necessarily going to repeat all those bad patterns. And that's just not true.
I know a lot of folks like that. And
Yeah.
to be honest with you, and I love that young man's heart, because I know a lot of guys like that, even from my time, my friends now, because they know the truth of the matter. And the truth of the matter is that statistically, if you have a father or didn't have a father in your home, statistically, you are prone to a lot of outcomes that aren't desirable. That's just the facts.
Mm-hmm.
But within that, there's no certainty. Just like there's no certainty that even if you had a dad that you say is a great dad, that you're going to follow in his footsteps. There's no certainty of that either.
Right.
But I think that's the beauty of the gospel. And not to even sound like super religious, that even though I am, the beauty of the gospel is that even though we are hell-bent on destruction, even though your past was terrible, even though your dad or your mom wasn't there and they left you for dead, even though you did plenty of things that were horrible, the power of the gospel is to totally transform your life and allow you and help you to be the father in this case that you don't know how to be. And also the beauty of the gospel and the beauty of the community of believers is that there are other people around you, Lord willing, that can help pour into you and challenge you as you grow together in doing this thing called fatherhood and manhood that is so difficult. You don't have to do it alone. And I think that's what's has been exciting for me to see from guys that I know. I had a father who was in my life, is in my life. He's my, other than my wife, my best friend now. He was the best man at my wedding. He's somebody that I call all the time and somebody that I rely on for wisdom, to challenge me, to care about me when I'm uncertain and all those sorts of things. But even so, I was terrified about being a dad.
Mm-hmm.
But God and but other people that were put around me to help me in this situation. But you're right. So many men have that fear. And sometimes, honestly, it's those guys that had that sort of fear in them that end up being the world changers.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. One of the life issues that we're facing right now are deaths of despair, as they're called, with addiction, opioid addiction, high suicide rates. And one of the reasons for that, if you dig down into it, is a sense of worthlessness or meaninglessness. Sometimes it happens with guys who maybe have lost their jobs, or maybe their jobs didn't turn out the way they thought they would. And I was thinking about that when I was reading in your book. You talked about when you were in the NFL and tearing your ACL, and about just what that was like to be off the field for a little while. And I wonder what you learned there that might apply to people who are out there who just say, I feel like I'm off the field and I don't know when I'm ever going to be back on, if I've ever been on in the first place.
And part of being an NFL athlete is your value is tied to your ability to perform. Like if you can't perform on the field, there's really no need for you to be there. Like we don't need any more cheerleaders. We don't need anybody to say rah rah. Like if you can't run and catch or block or throw, We don't need you to be there. And when so much of your life is predicated on your performance, many times we find our value in how we perform. That's only natural. We find our value in people patting us on the back, or being able to watch myself on film and say, I did that. Or maybe it's for you in the boardroom and you're closing deals, or maybe you're creating a curriculum, or maybe you're in construction, you're building these buildings and you're saying, look, I did that. And when that's taken away, sometimes we're left wondering, who am I? Like, why am I here? And I would love to sit here and tell you that I figured all that out. But it seemed like every single time that happened, I had to go back to the drawing board and say, you know what, God brought me through that. He'll bring me through something else. And even over the last 3 years, Dr. Moore, in leaving the NFL, I've dealt with some of that as well. I've dealt with a bit of an identity crisis. Mm-hmm. Benjamin, who are you? You don't play football anymore. It's what you poured your life into. Who are you outside of that? And it's amazing how God has used people in my circle. He's used my wife tremendously, my dad, even my children, one of them asked me the other day, Daddy, what are you going to do for the rest of your life? I said, I'm going to try to keep you alive for part of it.
That's right.
But to the man or woman who's listening, who feels like they are in despair, our value as people was never supposed to be based on what we do, our occupation, or even what somebody else says about us. That's hard to understand. It's hard to feel, but our value is based on a God who created us and a God who loves us. And my prayer has always been, even for me, to understand that more and more every single day, because it has to be reinforced. It sounds pie in the sky, but that's the truth of the matter.
Yeah. My friend David Brooks wrote years ago, and I think about it all the time. And it might be the most quoted thing that he's ever written, the difference between resume virtues and eulogy virtues, that what we want are the resume virtues, all the things that we did. But at the end of your life, what you're worried about are not those things, because that's not what people are talking about at your funeral. They're talking about your character. They're talking about your service to other people. They're talking about those things that it's easy for us just to forget when we're chasing the resume virtues, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And those are the virtues that are going to leave an impact. Yeah, those are the virtues that are going to really change lives for eternity and not just for now.
The book is called The New Fight for Life, Roe, Race, and a Pro-Life Commitment to Justice. Check it out, and it might be a good resource not only for you, but for folks in your church who are trying to think through, where should we go from here? Benjamin Watson, always good to have you on the show. Thanks for being here.
Thanks so much, sir. Good as always.
I have a new book coming out on August the 1st of this year. It's called Losing Our Religion, an Altar Call for Evangelical America. And really what this book is about is how to navigate the craziness that we're all facing right now. How do we get to the point of exhaustion that so many people are facing? Why are so many people leaving the church? Not because they can't believe what the church teaches, but because they don't believe the church believes what the church teaches. How can evangelical Christianity ever turn around? What would that look like, and how do we get there? That's what this book is about, and you can pre-order it in the show notes, and I look forward to sharing it with you August 1st. Thanks for listening. Links are always in the show notes for resources mentioned in this episode, including a link about how you can have a trial membership to Christianity Today. Be sure to subscribe to the program, send an episode along to a friend who might benefit from it, and leave us a review when you can. It helps other people to find the show wherever you listen to podcasts. I'm Russell Moore, and this is The Russell Moore Show from Christianity Today.
The Russell Moore Show is a production of Christianity Today. Executive producers are Eric Petrick, Russell Moore, and Mike Cosbert. Hosted by Russell Moore, produced by Ashley Hales, associate producers Abby Perry and Azrae Phelps, CT administration provided by Christine Kolb, social media by Kate Lucky, director of operations for CT Media is Matt Stevens. Production assistance provided by Core Media. Audio engineer is Kevin Duthu. Coordinator is Beth Grabencourt. Video producer is John Rowland. The theme song for The Russell Moore Show is Dusty Delta Day by Lennon Hutton.